This is the Money Loves Women podcast, the podcast that guides women to wealth and an extraordinary life. Here's your host, Dr. Deborah Ekstrom.
This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom for the Money Loves Women podcast. I'd like to welcome Robin Hauser. She is at Finish Line Feature Films. I think I got that right this time, Robin. Robin is a documentary maker, and her most recent film is Savvy. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Savvy with a $sign for the S, where she talks about women and money. But first, Robin, tell us a little bit about yourself, your growing up years, and what influenced you in that time.
Well, I grew up in San Francisco in the mid 60s. So it was an interesting place to be. Of course, I was very young then, but I love San Francisco. And I have a father who was an investment counselor and a mother who did a ton of volunteer work. So one of the things they both inspired me to do from as long as I could remember, one was work, find a way to make money, and two was to give back. So to always be, charitable and philanthropic.
Is that what led you, you think, into documentaries? The giving back, the sort of teaching?
Yes. Especially given the type of films I make, right? I don't make, I have yet to make, I should say, big commercial films. So I have a lot of the films that I have made, pretty much all of them in one way or another, are what I would call social impact filmmaking. So I made a film about a coach who had Lou Gehrig's disease and his team that tried to rally around him to make him the winningest coach in California history. Made a film about the lack of diversity in tech that came out in 2015. So that was timely. I made a film about unconscious bias because I was just really curious about these. We know that there are people out there who are prejudiced, but what about those of us that are just carrying these unconscious biases, and how does that affect our lives socially and in the workplace? And most recently, I made this film Savvy about women and money, and that's really exploring why do women tend to abdicate major financial decisions to somebody else, and usually that's the man in their life.
Yes. I want to talk about that. But first, let's ask you some questions about your education and how do you become, because I think lots of people would like to document something. How do you become a documentary filmmaker, and how do you finance that?
Oh boy. Well, I did not go to film school. I actually have my MBA. I worked in the stock market. So for me, filmmaking, but I've always been a photographer. I've always been interested in photography. And I remember being especially inspired by, while I was sitting in the theater watching different documentaries and thinking someday I want to do visual storytelling. And that opportunity arose in 2010 when my daughter happened to be on a cross-country team. Their coach had Lou Gehrig's disease, and there was sort of an incident that happened at the state championships that made their team famous. And I had documentary filmmakers come to me saying that they wanted to make a film about this team and what they did for their coach. And so I was able to get on board of that. And I eventually took the film over and finished co-directing it. So that was an interesting experience. That was like going to film school, honestly.
Yeah.
Funding is a different issue. I've been fortunate in that I have found some wonderful corporate partners over the last 10 years who have believed in my projects, who have wanted to put their name and logo on the film because they believe in the issue. I have found individuals who have either donor advised funds or foundations from which they can give generously. So I'm grateful to everybody that's helped me fund my films. It is not easy. I'm actually right now having a very difficult time funding my film in progress. I think it has to do with the environment and just sort of tapping into the right people.
Yes. So you didn't go to film school, but you did get an MBA, and you certainly have lots of background in finance. So you are well positioned to make this film called Savvy. Tell us about your film from 2021 called Savvy.
Well, I have just a little experience in finance. It's true that I worked for Nomura Securities as a bank, and I was selling IPOs. So that was that was fun. I did that out of college, and I worked for First Union National Bank when I first got out of business school. So I do have a little bit of a financial background, but I'm not a certified financial planner or advisor. But I did get divorced 7 years ago. And despite the fact that my father is an investment counselor, and despite the fact that I have a great education and an MBA, I was not prepared for handling finances completely on my own when I got divorced. And I remember thinking, wow, if I'm in this situation, there must be so many other women out there in equal or worse situations. And it inspired me to look into, why do women, tend to, is this just me? Is it older generations? Why do we tend to not dive into financial matters on our own? Why do we lack confidence when it comes to money? And what our research led us to understand, something really shocking. This is not an issue that's getting better. In fact, millennials, to a greater extent than any other generation, are not paying attention to their personal finances. They are abdicating major financial decisions to the men in their lives. And that's shocking to me. So I wanted to research why. My team and I looked into what are the biggest issues that women in particular, not solely, but women in particular, face when they're dealing with money. Whether it's, credit card debt, whether it's student loan debt, financial fragility, not knowing anything about money in a relationship, and suddenly their partner or their spouse dies, and they become widowed. Many women are completely out to lunch, and when it comes to that, and then they're easy prey, right, for financial fraud, for example. And then there's financial abuse. There are many women that cannot, and this happens, by the way, the world over, but it doesn't matter whether you're bringing in millions of dollars a year or whether you're just living paycheck to paycheck. Women often, if they're not abreast of their financial situation, find themselves in abusive relationships. And maybe that's psychologically abusive, maybe it's physically as well, but especially in situations where they're not financially independent. So they don't have the means to get themselves out of a job that's not serving them, out of a relationship that's not serving them, because they don't have the confidence to go it alone, or they simply don't have the financial resources.
So all those things that can happen because we don't have confidence and knowledge about money. So what were the reasons you found that women abdicate all this power away?
Well, it's complicated, which is why it makes it an interesting film. If there was an easy answer to this, I don't think I would have made a film about it. But I think that our societal norms has something to do with it, and especially in Western culture, but truly what I've found in many parts of the world. And I want to say that there are, of course, exceptions to all of this, everything that I'm saying. And we know that there are women out there in the audience saying, in my household, I handle all the money. And often women handle the day-to-day finances. The question is, are they in on and are they knowledgeable about the long-term financial decisions? Do they know how much debt they have? Do they know who holds the mortgage? Do they know how much savings they have? Do they those type of questions that are really important to know? And again, it's fine if you happen to be in a relationship where one person is more responsible with money than, or not responsible, but is more in charge of the family money than the other. But each partner needs to understand how it works in case they suddenly were on their own. So societal norms is one big reason I think that this happens. And then, as we talked about before, there's the confidence gap. And what happens is, women have a lot on our plate. And so if we're handling the children and the volunteer hours for the school, and then maybe even our own jobs, if there's one thing we can delegate it and get it off our to-do list, that's what we're going to do. We're going to say, you deal with the money. And even very many well-intended husbands saying, I really need you to come to this meeting with our financial planner. And the woman usually finds an excuse not to do that, because what happens is, as she as he becomes more and more knowledgeable by just digging in and learning about finances, learning about investing, learning about 529s and 401ks, the woman becomes less and less knowledgeable and savvy. And that's when her insecurity around money grows. So she doesn't want to go to the financial planner because maybe there's a bit of shame that she hasn't kept up with the finances, that she doesn't understand the terminology. And I will say that the financial world has not done a really great job of making women feel comfortable. So there's a sort of sense of ambient right? Disbelonging for women. And when you're throwing around a bunch of acronyms, a woman can often feel a little bit insecure about not knowing what I know I should know. I have a college degree. I think I probably should know what a 529 is, but I don't. And so they in these meetings, even if they are there, their sort of eyes get glossy, and they're typically not with a financial advisor that understands the issues that women face when it comes to money. So they're probably not, even if they're very well intended, they're probably speaking more to the man. They're probably using terminology and stuff that is intimidating and makes a woman feel marginalized in that conversation.
So we're societally oriented toward not including women and not asking or insisting on being included. And it's so interesting because the data shows that 98% of women sooner or later are going to be the sole person responsible for their financial situation. So that's frightening when we're finding that women are really abdicating. So you must have gone into this with a lot of depth and interview.
Yeah, most women will end up alone. Women live longer than men, on average 7 years. Women have less Social Security because they spend more time out of the workforce, caring for children and elderly relatives. And women earn less. So we have longer lives to afford with less money.
Yes.
And it's why we are in a precarious situation, and why women need to understand money and learn about how to handle money. And the truth is, it's not rocket science. I mean, you can learn how to invest these days. You can get a financial advisor that can help you invest. I think you should always go to a trustworthy institution to do that. But a Fidelity or a Schwab, for example, can absolutely help you learn how to invest your money. And I don't think that people should be day traders. That's not, unless that's your profession. But you can invest in funds or ETFs and different sort of financial pools that will really, help diversify your money, but that will basically make your money grow for you.
So the answer to this is what? Education and good advisors?
I think there's a few things that need to happen. One, we absolutely need to teach financial literacy or personal finance in school. And I think we should do an age-appropriate course in grade school. I think we should do a mandatory standalone course in high school. And I think we need to take it again in college. I think it's absolutely essential, so that the more information we have, the more we know about it, the less intimidated we're going to be. That's important. That needs to happen. And I think when I made the film, only 8 states offered a standalone financial literacy course, mandatory course. And now that's at least doubled. I think there's 18 states, but still that's not enough. 18 out of 50, right?
Yeah.
So that's something we need to do. 2, we need to start talking about money. There's this taboo about talking about money. And that's the way our culture is. I think that we need to change that. And I think that we need to realize that it's actually okay to talk about money. And if somebody does talk about money, that's okay. Don't shame them for that. You should talk about money with your spouse. You should certainly talk about money with your partner before you tie the knot, before you get married. Find out, how much debt do they have? Or do they stand to inherit any money? What are your money scripts? What are your money goals? Are you a spender? Are you a saver? Do you like to give money to philanthropic causes? Do you value education for your children? Or do you think the public schools might be fabulous and great for your kids? But these are just conversations that need to be had. And yeah, a lot of people say, well, that's not very romantic, but I mean, it's a contract and so is marriage. So having a prenup, I think, is really, really important. But I'm a firm believer in having your own bank account. And it's okay to I'm going to have my account. He or she's going to have their account. And we can then have a household joint account, right? But nobody wants to have to ask permission to go buy a sweater. I mean, if we have a way of making money, and even if you're the partner or the spouse in a relationship that has decided to give up the career to stay home and help raise the kids, that's great. Don't feel like that means that you don't have say in how you invest or how you spend your money. You do.
Or even your own bank account.
Absolutely.
Maybe you set up what your payment is going to be of what the family brings in for your services.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So great. I can't wait to see the film. Let's talk about some other things. I think you've got so many interesting subjects that you deal with women. Talk to me a little bit about your ideas around financial wellness and then about the likability dilemma.
Well, financial wellness, I think we pretty much just talked about, right? Financial wellness is having financial independence. It's not being dependent on anybody else for money. So I think for that, what we need to do is we need to always have a way to make money. And I'm a firm believer in making kids work in their summer breaks, whether it's scooping ice cream at your local ice cream store or babysitting or mowing lawns, but really understanding the value of money and working from a young age. Of course, once it's legal to do so. But really, I think that's so important, and that will help develop a strong work ethic. And I tell young women who are getting married, keep a foot in the corporate world or in a way to make money, because you just never know what the future holds. You might be in a situation where both of you need to go back to work. And so I think that's really important. Financial wellness is not having to stay in a job where you're feeling underserved or undervalued. It's certainly not having to stay in a relationship where you feel like you're, a relationship that doesn't serve you, or where you feel like you're being abused. So that's financial wellness, right? Understanding enough to be able to live the way you want to live and not be stuck in any situation because you can't afford to get out of it. So likability dilemma is something that's completely different. There's probably some overlap, but the likability dilemma is something that I studied that shows that the higher a woman, the more of a leadership role that a woman takes on. So the higher a woman goes up in the corporate ladder, the less likable she becomes. And it's very interesting. This is something that happens. Both men and women judge other women more harshly when they become leaders. And the reason for this is because in our society, we have certain expectations for women. And we expect women to be helpful, supportive, differential. We expect men to be confident, decisive, assertive. And yet, look at how we define leaders and leadership, and look at the traits that we as a society value in leadership, which also often is being decisive, competent, assertive. So when women adapt these traits in order to succeed as leaders in any industry, really, she becomes less likable because she's violating societal norms of what it is to be a likable woman. And I think that there are a lot of women that understand this and a lot of women that have felt this. And if we were all being really honest with ourselves, we've probably judged other women this way before. Boy, she's kind of full of herself, right? Mm-hmm. But there was a really interesting experiment done at Columbia University where Professor Flynn years ago, back in the 80s, took a case study. And this was a case study about a woman named Heidi Roizen, who was a very successful female venture capitalist. And what he did was the students that were working on this in Dr. Flynn's class changed the name to Howard Flynn. I'm sorry, to Howard. So there was Heidi Roizen, changed the name to Howard Roizen. Everything else remained the same, but they changed the gender and changed the pronouns, of course. And so he divided his class in two, and half the class got the Heidi Roizen case study, and the other half got the Howard Roizen case study. And he asked his students to rate how competent and then how likable each was, whether or not you'd want to work with this person, whether or not you would hire this person. Both men and women found Heidi and Howard equally competent, but people tended not to like Heidi. They felt like she was a little bit too aggressive and out for herself. So people actually said they would love for Howard to be their colleague. They would love to work with him. They would love to hire him, but nobody wanted to hire or work for Heidi. So we're talking about the exact same qualifications, the exact same profile. The only difference was they changed the name to make one female and one male. And it's shocking, because the truth is that we have a hard time liking women who are confident and assertive.
It's so interesting because I have a number of women that I've interviewed who've come out of corporate in one way or another, sometimes in very male-dominated fields, sometimes not, who basically said that they went into business for themselves because they just felt like they could not get the same advancement that their male colleagues were getting. Even though one woman told me, she finally asked and said, "Why am I being passed over?" And they said, "Well, you're too quirky. You're too quirky."
Yeah, we tend to. Sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
No, it's just, it's such a common theme.
Yeah, it is. And think about how often when even television reporters or commentators think about, or even our bosses, think about how often comments are about our personality, women's personality or appearance, as opposed to our skill level or our achievements or success, right? Often when a man is being reviewed, they talk about his accomplishments, what he's done, what he hasn't done, right? But they don't talk about necessarily his appearance or his voice or his tone or any of that. So women are definitely held to a different standard. There's no doubt about it.
Do you think sometimes women hold other women to a different standard because they want women to be, they feel like women should perform better than men in order to prove themselves?
Well, I mean, anything's possible. What I do think is that women also have unconscious biases towards other women. So this likability dilemma, we feel it too. If a woman walks in and is incredibly confident and tells us all that she's the best and tells us all that she's going to kick some booty and that she's, there's nobody better than her, that I bet you that women and men alike will both feel a little bit like, wow, that's kind of inappropriate, or that's crazy. Boy, she sure is, confident in herself. She sure is full of herself. Why? Because we're not used to women being that way. She's not being differential or necessarily helpful and supportive, right? There's another interesting study that they did that said that when women are really good negotiators, but women tend to be more successful when they negotiate for somebody else. Because when we negotiate on behalf of someone else, we come across as being helpful and supportive. When we negotiate for ourselves, for example, society, or, a raise or, benefits or that type of thing, again, we appear as being greedy or, wanting too much. This is not the same for men. When men negotiate on behalf of themselves, they do very well.
Those studies are so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robin, you've been leading what you're doing. are you working with men and women? And how do you feel you're coming across, and what's your feedback been, and how do you manage that?
I do work with both men and women. To make my documentary films, I have a female-centric a team. I have more women than men on it, but I have hired male directors of photography, male sound people, male engineers. So I don't want to be discriminatory based on anybody based on their gender. I mean, I would prefer just to hire the people that are most skilled and hire on merit. That said, I also believe that women need a leg up. And so if I can hire a woman, and especially because it's usually women that are most interested, not always, but that are most interested in the types of films that I'm making. So I do try to have a very diverse team, but it is female heavy, I will say. We have, variations in race and sexual identity, certainly socioeconomic differences, but mainly female. It's funny. You get to a certain age and you just stop caring about exactly how much gender sort of discrimination you're subject to. And it's not that I don't hear it. It's not that I don't notice it. I do, every single bit of it. But there's certain times it's like pick my battles, right? And right. I in my TED talk or the TEDx talk, I definitely point out some times that I noticed that, a little comment was made based on this assumption of my performance because I'm a woman. And there are times that I can just laugh it off and shrug it off. And there are the times that I rear up and say, whoa, hang on a second, and try to correct that. So, but I think it's harder to do when you're young. I think when you're young, a lot of people just sort of, deal with these, or maybe they don't even quite understand it. They don't want to believe it. I know that I, talked to my daughter about this years ago when she first entered the corporate world. And she was like, Mom, not everything's about gender. And it wasn't more than probably a year and a half, 2 years later that she came to me saying, oh my gosh, and told me a story about how she was treated by a certain person who was an older man in the industry. And his assumption that she wasn't, a decision maker because of her gender and her age, probably. So, eventually all women will feel this, I believe. And I don't think that we need to be victims of bias. I don't believe that that's going to get us anywhere. I think you learn to deal with it, but honestly, I think we just need to change the system so that doesn't happen anymore. And I think that takes a long time to change these perceptions. Whether it's that girls aren't good at math or, obviously there are biological differences between men and women, and this is what makes the world go around, and that's really okay. But making the assumption that I'm not going to be, good at math, or I can't be a good female director, or a good director. I think that's an interesting one in itself. I remember somebody saying, what's it like to be a female director? And luckily I was quick-witted enough at the time to say, well, I don't know what it's like to be any other director. It feels good to be a female director, same way it feels to be a director. But I doubt that person would go up to a man and say, what's it feel like to be a male director, right? So again, oftentimes this is unconscious biases. The person asking the questions or saying these things don't really intend to be insulting. Of course, there is blatant sexism, and that does happen too. But oftentimes it's things that people say thinking they're being well-meaning, and they don't quite realize. I was at a cocktail party, and I asked a man what he did for a living, and he said, oh, I'm in fintech. And I said, oh, what type? And he looked at me and he said, it's complicated. And I thought, if I were a man, I'm pretty certain he wouldn't have said that. He just made this assumption that I was a chick and I wasn't going to understand.
You didn't say, give me a try?
No, I just said, try me. At that point, I knew I didn't want to talk to him any longer anyway.
I heard a really interesting story. A woman that I know who is runs a big construction company, is into doing a lot of things to promote women and women of color and businesses of color. Has a branch business in Virginia, and when she was talking to somebody in decision-making capacity, I don't know if it was the CEO or who it was, the first time she talked to him, he said, "I'm going to teach you how to talk to me." What? Yeah, wow.
I wonder what that meant.
I don't know, but I think maybe his mama didn't teach him any manners.
Yeah, I guess not.
But I thought, oh, I wonder what's up there. And so did she. She was like a little taken aback. I mean, very highly competent woman.
Yeah.
And
No,
very
it's
successful,
crazy.
very achieved. But, I don't know. I'm going to teach you how to talk to me. Like, I'm the guy.
Yeah, I'm the dude.
I thought, I'm really glad that there's not a lot of people in my life like that. It's right it's true when you get older that a lot of it just passes you by. It's like not worth it.
It's not worth it. Pick your battles. And if I really felt like I wasn't getting, I'm not in this situation because I'm my own boss now, but if I felt like I wasn't getting paid what I deserved to be paid, or I wasn't being respected, just simply based on my gender, I would definitely speak up about it or try to rectify that situation. But if somebody makes a comment about, something else that's just really based on their ignorance, whatever,
yes.
Let it go, move on.
Yeah. You're probably not going to re-educate them anyway.
Yeah, probably not, sadly.
Or maybe not too much. It's really interesting though. Sometimes you can.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some really well-intended men who don't realize, what they say or what they do and how that might be degrading and demoralizing to women. They really, truly don't realize it. They're just used to this sort of bro culture that's been tolerated over the years. And so I think that there are a lot of people. And by the way, we, as women, we certainly have our biases and unconscious biases too. And we make, comments probably just as much. I mean, it's a little bit different, I think. And this sort of idea that, if a woman's cranky, oh, she must be on the rag, or, comments like that is just, it's almost sort of lazy. It's a lazy mind. Can they not be a little bit more creative? I mean, can they not? And by the way, I always go back to this. I think it's their own insecurities, because you just don't have to put down people like that. Unless there's something wrong with you, or you've had being a bad day, or you're not feeling very good about yourself.
Tell us about your TED Talk. Your TEDx
Well, the first TED Talk I did was, I was making a film called Bias. And I had done a workshop for TED women before that. And I had just reached out saying, hey, would do you need my services again? And they said, actually, we're interested in your new film. So this was way before COVID. It was 2017, I think. And they said, well, we're going to get on a video call. And I was like, ooh, what's that? That's exciting. So when I got on this video call, there were like 6 people on it. And I thought, well, they're just interested in knowing, what I'm working on. So I told them all about this film, Bias, and about unconscious bias. They said, well, what's the most interesting thing that you've learned by making the film? I said, oh, without a doubt, it's the fact that artificial intelligence is biased. They were like, can you explain that to us? I said, sure. I said, you would think that humans, we know that we're always going to be biased because we have human minds. So anything pretty much with a mind is going to have its own biases. So I thought, well, then the solution for this, the cure, is perhaps a supercomputer or artificial intelligence, because there's no human mind there. So this is, can it not strip away human bias? When in fact, unfortunately, because so much of artificial intelligence is based on data input, and data is skewed either by the person who is inputting the data, by the skewed source of that data, or just by typos even, So what's happening, and some of the experiments that I did that I thought were really interesting, is that if you put in a gender neutral language, like let's say Finnish, and if you said, okay, the doctor cared for its patient, automatically it would translate to English by saying the doctor cared for his patient. So it made the assumption that doctor was a man. And if you said the nurse cared for its patient, it came back saying the nurse cared for her patient. So artificial intelligence was already making assumptions based on all the data that it had collected, right? And that's the way this machine learning works. It made the assumption that chances are, if it's a nurse, it's a woman. And so we're just going to put that information in there and translate it to her rather than saying his or her, right? So that can be really dangerous in certain situations. But artificial intelligence is biased. So anyway, when I explained all this to them, they were like, this is fascinating. Where are you going to be on December 3rd? And can you do a TED Talk? And I was like, wow, sure. So that was an interesting experience. It's like going through boot camp, I'll tell you. I'd done a bit of public speaking beforehand. This brought it to a whole different level. I mean, it's a lot of work. They assign you a speaking coach, a writing coach, a design coach. It pretty much took over my life for about 3 months. And it was the scariest thing I've ever done, getting up on that stage. And I froze. Most of those performances that day did freeze at one point or not. I learned what stage fright was. But ultimately, it was a great opportunity, and that's what the talk was. It's such a specific topic. I think it's probably only has about 40,000 views right now. But about 2 years later, a year and a half later, I was contacted by TEDx community in Marin County, and they said, "Hey, we've got over 850 people in the live audience. We have reached to hundreds of thousands of people. We'd really like you to do a talk. Can you submit an application?" I said, no, I've already done TED. There's no reason for me to do TEDx. It was a terrifying experience. It was great, but it was scary. They're like, please, will you please just... So they finally contacted me one more time and said, listen, at 5:00 today, the application is needs to be submitted. So I sat down and I remember I was in Indiana, and I sat down and I just decided to write about unconscious bias and specifically about gender bias. And that led me to start writing about the likability dilemma. So I wrote this application saying, here are the things that really bug me. And I brought it from a very, very personal point of view, and talked about the times that I had specifically been victim to this, and then how, women all over the world deal with this type of bias. And they accepted it. And then I was determined to really nail this one, because the TED Talk itself would be, so difficult. And I did. I was a little bit less pressure because it was TEDx, even though it was almost the same, but I had a little bit more freedom. So I gave that talk, and luckily I did a great job. It was smooth. The audience seemed to appreciate it. But when I got off stage, I had 3 coaches, 2 were men, 1 was a woman. And the 2 men were there, and they're like, oh my God, they loved that. And it made me realize that they still couldn't, as men, couldn't quite understand what, gender bias, and especially subtle gender bias, microaggressions, and the likability dilemma, how that affects women, because they just couldn't relate to it. But about 8 months later, TED it was getting so many views, this TEDx talk, that TED adopted it, fact checked everything that I said, reworked it a little bit, and put it up on the TED platform. And I have almost 2 million views on that.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So the TEDx talk was more successful than the TED talk. Definitely has more people, but I think it's just because women can relate. I mean, women really relate to, even if they don't know exactly what the likability dilemma is, when it's explained to them, they're like, oh, yep, got that.
Yep, totally get it. Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me on. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
If you were going to give some advice and thank you, by the way, for the huge contribution you've made. I mean, look at what your life's been about. Fabulous. Thank you so much. If you were going to give some advice to my viewers on how they could become more successful, particularly in view of your research experience in filmmaking, what would you say?
Well, I would say, it sounds kind of corny, but just believe in yourself and don't think that anything's out of reach. I never thought I'd be a documentary filmmaker. I never thought I'd be a TED speaker, but these opportunities came along, and I like to say that if it feels a little uncomfortable, it's probably still worth doing, because I think that's what challenges are all about, right? So seize those opportunities, even if you think, oh, I'd rather be sitting on a beach somewhere than doing that kind of work. Ultimately, I think it pays off. And and support other women. I think that's really important, and support the men that want to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Very wise words. Thanks for coming on Money Loves Women. And just tell me if someone wants to see your film or wants to reach out to you or see your TED Talks, tell us how they go about doing that.
Sure. Well, you can just Google Robin Hauser, Hauser, TED, and my talks will pop up. And then if you would like to watch my films, the majority of them are on Amazon Prime Video. And Savvy is on my website for a $25 donation. So that's finishlinefeaturefilms.com. Go to the Savvy page and say view documentary. And there's an opportunity to pay through PayPal. It goes to a nonprofit. And that's how you can watch Savvy.
Fabulous. Finishlinefeaturefilms.com. Easy words, easy words. So go look at Savvy if you love this stuff. Look at Robin's TED and TEDx talks and get a real deep understanding of her research and what she's done and what she's brought to the world. Thanks so much, Robin, for coming on.
Deborah.
It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's an honor.
Thank you. This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom for the Money Loves Women podcast. To your health, to your wealth, and to your happiness. May blessings rain down upon you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Money Loves Women podcast. Please leave us a rating and review so we know how we can improve. Visit MoneyLovesWommen.com to gain more insight into how to live an extraordinary life.